Hello, so today we are going to be going over 7.4a. Let's start off with a question. Name a quadrilateral we have not talked about yet. And that's a easy one. We haven't talked about a rhombus. I love rhombus. I like the name. I think it's cool. But let's, other ones we haven't talked about, rectangle, square, trapezoid, kites. All those are quadrilaterals we haven't talked about yet. But we're on parallelograms. So let's talk about our parallelogram properties. Okay, our first property, the opposite sides are parallel. 2, our opposite sides are also congruent. Our opposite angles are also congruent. Our consecutive angles are supplementary. And then our diagonals bisect. So those are our parallelogram properties. Let's talk about a rhombus. A rhombus is a type of parallelogram, but all of the sides are congruent, not just the opposite sides. All of them are congruent. So here, if I try to draw one here, and we'll call this X, Y, W, X, Y, Z. This is congruent to this, and this. And another thing with rhombuses is that the angle inside our centers is always a 90 degree. Or, as most people know what a rhombus is, it's a beautiful diamond. We'll call this A, B, C, and D. All of the sides are the same, and the center angle, always 90 degrees. So here, all properties, so a rhombus has all the properties of a parallelogram. All 4 sides are congruent. So, for example, our WXYZ, WX has to be congruent to XY, has to be congruent to YZ, and has to be congruent to WZ. The diagonals are also perpendicular because they make a 90 degree angle. They are always perpendicular. So that means XZ is perpendicular to WY in our first picture. The next type of quadrilateral is a rectangle. And a rectangle is a parallelogram. It is a type of parallelogram. And all 4 angles, all the angles are congruent. Right? Where the rhombus, all the sides are congruent, the rectangle, all the angles are congruent. So you should know how to be able to draw a rectangle by now. We'll call this A, B, C, and D. Draw this here. The sides don't have to be congruent. The opposite sides do. But here, all the angles are congruent, and they have to be 90 degrees. They have to be 90 degrees. So that either looks like this or this. The key is all the angles have to be 90 degrees. So all 4 angles are congruent and are right angles. So angle A is congruent to angle B, which is also congruent to angle C, which is also congruent to angle D. And the diagonals are also congruent. The diagonal here being AD has to be congruent to then CB. Right? Moving on. A square is a type of parallelogram that has all four congruent sides and all four congruent angles. So the sides are congruent and the angles are congruent. And if you don't remember, if all of our sides and angles are also congruent, a square is also considered a regular quadrilateral. So if you're like, okay, what's a regular quadrilateral? It's a square. So here, first it has to have all the properties of parallelogram, all the properties of a rhombus, and all the properties of a rectangle. So the rhombus, meaning all the sides are equal or congruent, all sides congruent. So SQ has to be congruent to QU, has to be congruent to AU, has to be congruent to SA. All the rectangles, meaning the angles are the same. So all the angles congruent. That means angle S congruent to angle Q, congruent to angle U, congruent to angle A. Okay, so let's try this out here. Number one, use the information of the diagram to classify the quadrilateral. Well, here, all the sides congruent. So this means we got a rhombus, just a rhombus. Here, the sides and angles congruent. We have a square. Okay? Let's try our other properties. Try it out. Use the properties given in the special quadrilateral to find the missing pieces. So this one is a rhombus. Number one is a rhombus. That means all the sides are the same. And they want to know the sides. Well, this side is 4. That means the other sides have to be 4. Rectangle. The rectangle, this says this is 12, right? EG is 12. FH, X has to equal 12 because X is FH, that is 12. The diagonals in the rectangle are congruent. This one is a square. The square has all of the properties. This angle here is the same as that angle there. Well, this angle here is 90 degrees. The other angle has to also be 90 degrees. Let's look at number 4. We have a rhombus. They want to know what is this? X has to be 90 degrees. This rectangle PQRS, oh, this is one diagonal and the other one's another diagonal. So they have to be equal. So I'm going to set them equal and solve. Subtract X, X must equal 5. And that is that.